Yeah, so that's the limited company. I have a personal email, but that's the limited company. And that very much comes from an equation. What you know about me and what everybody else probably will work out reasonably quick if they hang around for 3/4 of an hour is I am very left-brained, he says, picking up his right hand. Very left-brained, very diagrammatical, very sequenced. It's how the world makes sense. I attach to content, not people. We might get to that. And so most of the things that have meaning for me come from an equation or a sequence or a diagram. And so we have a flip chart. Which honestly, one of my best friends. Flip chart is one of my best friends. And so A more than D comes from this equation, which is A plus B plus C greater than or equal to D. Let me just say, I excuse my writing. I'm left-handed, but I can't write with my left hand on a flip chart. So that's my wrong hand doing its best. So if I work you through this, and obviously you've got an A more than D, but we've got B and C before we get to just having A and D. So let me start with C and tell you what this is. If you listen to the words, then the writing makes sense, because the writing doesn't always make itself legible. So this is next steps.
Yep.
So this idea, as you think through this, the last thing you'll come to is what's a next step.
Sure.
And so we'll get to that. B is a vision of something better. So what would a future look like?
Yeah.
What could this look like? And part of what I'm relearning in probably even just the last few months is when I've taught this before and shared it, because part of why I think I'm on the planet, certainly in my 50s now, is just to give stuff away that I think is useful.
Yeah.
And so typically I've rushed to A and D and I've said next steps is fine, vision is easy, we can come up with that, and that gets me to A and D. And I'm going to do that in a minute. But what I've seen again recently is the size of our vision makes a real difference.
Yeah.
So if we only throw ourselves and cast ourselves and our team a small vision, then it's not going to be very magnetic. It's not going to be very impactful.
Yeah.
The bigger the vision, and I'm not talking about blab it and grab it.
Yeah.
I'm talking about something that's within reach but might be a stretch. It makes a
Yeah.
difference. Anyway, so if I say those are things and now just say, let's take those out, then you're left with A and D. So A is greater than D. And this whole thing is around change.
Yeah.
So A is our dissatisfaction. Big words, can't remember how many S's are in satisfaction, so I'm not even going to try because I'd embarrass myself. Dissatisfaction with the status quo.
Okay.
How upset am I about now?
Yeah.
How uncomfortable is now? How not okay is now?
Yeah.
And D is the cost of change. And so A more than D is my way of saying to people, we change
Yeah.
when our dissatisfaction is greater than the cost of change.
Yeah.
And only then. And these things weigh in. And then if you think about it, you can then dial in next steps.
Yeah.
So I give you an example. I'll give you a personal example and then I'll try and give you a business example. Part of my iterations of life, and we can talk about that if it's helpful for you guys, I've had a series of kind of epiphanies really where I've just made step changes in how I behave. And one of those was when I decided that it wasn't that I didn't want to work full time anymore. It was that I wanted to be a husband and a dad and give time away to charity and to people. And so there was only one way to do that, which was to change jobs.
Yeah.
Because I was stockbroking at the time. I was heading up a trading desk and I said to my chief exec, hey, do you want 3 days a week? And the right answer from him was no. And he said no, because you can't do that job part-time. So I went and I phoned my best client.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, we've been joking about me joining your team and now I'm ready. What do you think?
Yeah.
Wildly intuitive, lovely person. Literally in a 10-minute phone call, I phoned him at home on a Wednesday night and he's like, done.
Wow.
He said, I'll talk to HR, we'll draw up a contract. Now, what had happened for me in that process was I knew I was dissatisfied because I was just pulled too thin. I couldn't do everything that I wanted to. I was just tired. I'd done my season in there. I knew what better would look like.
Yeah. More time with your family.
More time with my family, more time to give away, more balance, more holisticity. I know people don't always like work-life balance, more holisticity.
Yeah.
There's only one version of me. I just take it into different roles in life. And the next step was going to be go to 3 days.
Yeah.
And once my existing employee said no, it was like, okay, got to find somebody else now then. So they said no. And so I was left with this, but there's a cost to this change.
Yeah.
And here's the cost. I was known as a stockbroker.
Yeah.
And I was good at stockbroking.
Yeah.
Like I was known in the country in my little niche as a decent stockbroker. My best client wasn't a stockbroker.
No.
It was a fund management firm. I was changing into a different lane.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I might not be good at that. I might not be known at that. So there's one thing that I had to try and take account of. The other big change was typically when you move from working 5 days a week to 3 days a week, you earn less money.
Yeah.
Because somebody's not so keen to pay for full time when you're only giving it 60%.
Yeah.
And so I'm less bothered about money for me. I'd happily live in a caravan. I'd actually happily live in a mobile home. But I had a wife and we had children. And
Yeah.
so I just had to wrap my head around that. And so I went through this wrestle. So by the time I'd phoned my best client at home, I kind of wrestled this thing down that said, no, I am sufficiently dissatisfied that I will undertake the cost of change. Here's the really interesting bit of this, and I have multiple examples of where this has been the case.
Yeah.
For me at least, and you guys will have to work it out for yourselves, my bias and my wiring has me underestimate how dissatisfied I am and amplify the cost of change.
Yeah.
And therefore I'm held back from taking change that I probably should if I weighed these things correctly.
Yeah.
And so once I'd come to terms with that, then I made that change. Here's the strange part of this story, and here's what I think is a truism. I actually, not 60% at a 60% grossed up rate, at a pounds and pence rate, I earned more in my next full year working 3 days a week than I'd ever earned working 5 days a week.
And I guess your mind was saying you could never do that.
Never do that.
When you're in the A stage. And
right. And it was risk. So to be clear, that earnings was a salary and a bonus.
Yeah.
And it was the bonus that pushed the numbers over the top. So salary for salary, there was a decrease.
Yeah.
But all up. And this again is part of this holisticity that says, as I become a wholer, happier person, it ripples into all of my existences.
Yeah.
And so there's that. And think about it at a people level. Let's bring it back to people running businesses. Now, I'm sure we've all had to let people go. There is a version of this whenever we come, particularly either senior people.
Yeah.
You know, I've had to let some execs go on boards. And definitely anybody that's been around for a while where there's an element of friendship, it's tough to do that.
Yeah.
And so you come to this, it's not as bad as I think it is.
The cost of the conversation
is
more than you perceive the dissatisfaction.
The cost of the disruption.
Yeah.
If you change a chief exec on a business, particularly a decent sized business, there's disruption.
Yeah.
There's cultural disruption.
Yeah.
There's strategic disruption.
Sure.
And so you do have to work out that you think you have to make the change, but not go as far as talk yourself out of it.
Yeah.
And I think for a while on some of my biggest changes, whether it's in my own life or in business life, I've maybe been a little bit slow to push to the change. But honestly, the big ones I've never regretted.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes a wake-up call, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking about people who maybe have like a health transformation and lose 10, 15 stone. And a lot of the times it's on the back of a health scare or a loved one dying. Yeah. And all of a sudden they've probably been dissatisfied for a decade.
Yeah, your weightings change at times like that.
Yeah.
The things that seemed important aren't quite as important anymore.
Yeah.
Rockefeller, when he died, his lawyer came into the room and one of the reporters couldn't wait for the answer, so he shouted out, how much did he leave? And the lawyer said, all of it. Not taking any of it with us.
Yeah.
We might want to set our kids up, that's fine. Might want to do some legacy stuff, that's fine. But your weightings just change.
Yeah.
And that's certainly part of my story, that as I've moved from 30s through 40s into 50s, the weighting of things that are important has changed. But that's one of the things that I consistently come back to. And to answer your question, that's why you email me like you do.
A more than D. And so how do I apply that? How do people watching apply that today, where they know there's some dissatisfaction? I think about people setting New Year's resolutions, and this is because the dissatisfaction is there, but the cost is not worth the dissatisfaction,
or the vision's not big enough. So typically, I'd suggest that once you've got A and B and D, you can find the next step.
Yeah.
So, to your weight one, I'm losing weight at the minute. I've lost weight through periods of time. I have never lost weight when somebody else thought it was a good idea.
Yeah.
I've only ever lost weight when I thought it was a good idea.
Yeah.
So here's what's got my attention right now.
Yeah.
We have a 9-month-old granddaughter.
Yeah.
And my hips aren't great.
Yeah.
And I'm carrying a few kilos too many.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, the weightings of things, my dissatisfaction went up because I want to be around for our granddaughter. I want to take her to the park.
Well, the vision's gone up as well.
I want to do the things. And the cost of change, one less burger or one less something or an extra Peloton class. I'm like, sure.
Yeah,
it's
worth it.
I can do that. And so I would encourage people who have got something, if you think about it, you start at either vision or dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
Picture something that's not how you'd want it to be in life, that you think you can do something about.
Yeah.
Now, I can talk in a minute about, Stephen Covey talked about circles of influence and circles of concern. Like, life goes really badly wrong really quickly when we spend time in the circle of concern where we can't influence it.
Yes. Yeah.
Just doesn't work. And it's a thing I do with myself weekly because I have a weekly check-in. I'm like, where am I spending time in my circle of concern?
Yeah.
It's absolutely exhausting.
Some people call it like the reptile thinking,
Yeah.
where you're only focusing on what can go wrong and the negative and...
Yeah, but things that you just, if I draw it out, it's literally, the way Covey does it, it has a circle of focus.
Yeah.
What should I be focused on? Then it has a circle of influence. Then it has a circle of concern.
Yeah.
By definition of concentric circles, everything I can influence, I'm also concerned about. But anything that lives out here, I'm concerned about it. I've got no influence.
Yeah.
Like, just don't.
Yeah.
Like, you can spin your wheels and waste a whole lifetime out there,
Well,
personally and professionally.
Isn't the world right now, we're in coming into May 2025 as we record this, isn't our world spending a lot of time on what they're concerned about but what they can't influence, geopolitical?
Absolutely. Now, I could get majorly concerned about whether there's a recession coming or if I go even more meta, I could get concerned about what my girls are. We have 2 daughters, they're in their 20s. Like, I'm not sure what the world's going to be like when they're in their 50s.
Yeah.
But there's very little I can do to influence that apart from give them the tools that I think I can, set them up as best I can, have honest conversations, be the best role model. They're the things that I can do something about. And so to the audience, pick something where there's some A.
Yeah.
Where can you verbalize where you're dissatisfied?
But to interject. So for me, let's say Craig Rochelle said, we all know 3 things that we need to change. So if I asked, we've got Kai, Charlie here, me and you, we probably would all know 3 things right now that we could change.
Yeah.
And that will be true for everyone watching. How do you work that order out, and then how do you build it? So let's say someone's dissatisfied with their turnover right now in the business, but they're making profit, they're fairly happy, and they're just ticking along. Growth curve maybe comes into this.
Yeah.
What do they do with that?
Well, I think motivation's important.
Yeah.
So I know you've said revenue.
But
Profit and cash as associations, that don't just chase revenue because that's just vanity. Let's just get that one down for a business audience.
Yeah.
But if you make it about the more meaningful metrics of profit or cash, where are you in that cycle? Why do you want more? Is what that's going to cost you worth it? And then there's also a timing issue here around filling your pipeline is probably important. Can you leverage? Some people, you're dissatisfied that, I'll give you an example from my consulting. You're dissatisfied that your revenue's down and you see bigger. And the next step is to go and have that conversation with the client that you did an introductory deal, and now it's time for them to pay full beans.
Yeah.
Cost of change, sure. They tell me to get stuffed.
Yeah.
They all together, or they say no, or it sours the relationship, or all of that. So we talk ourselves out of wanting more revenue.
Yeah.
So it's pushing this thing through and working out where's your block?
Yeah.
And is that going to stay a block? Is it a legitimate block? Because we can't make change all the time.
Yeah.
You know, you and I would maybe get onto a thing called the AIM cube, and you and I live on very different sides of that. So you move towards exploration and risk and adventure, and I move into the direction away from risk and towards stability. So you've got your own natural wiring, but even once you've taken that into account, might you need to take a member of staff on that's going to look stupid to your bottom line in the short term, but that person's going to catalyze your revenue.
Yeah.